Welcome to the Peculiar History Channel. For the next, however long it takes, I will be attempting to list 7 facts about every single U.S. president in history. Continuing with Part 2, Abraham Lincoln.
Fact number 1. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in LaRue County, Kentucky. He was born to an illiterate father who was a farmer, and a mother who by all accounts seemed like a very smart woman. However, she would pass away in 1818 when Abraham was only 9 years old. Abraham was the middle child of 3 kids, an older sister Sarah and a younger brother Thomas. However, Thomas would pass away shortly after he was born. Abraham's father, Thomas, would remarry a woman named Sarah in 1819. This marriage to Sarah was a real turning point in Abraham's life. Abraham and his new stepmother would develop a close and loving bond, a bond which lasted for the rest of Abraham's life, as his stepmother did outlive him. It was Abraham's stepmother who encouraged young Abraham to keep reading, keep learning, and to always practice compassion. He always referred to her as his mother, and would often claim that she was his best friend. Fact number 2. Abraham Lincoln was tall, as most of us know, and he was certainly an imposing figure, athletic, broad-shouldered, and 6'4", which might as well be 7 feet tall in today's society. Lincoln put this impressive stature and physique to good use, becoming a world-famous wrestler. The story starts when Lincoln was just 19 years old. Growing up a farmer and standing at an impressive height made Lincoln a formidable foe. When he was 19, he successfully defended his stepbrother John's flatboat from being raided by thieves. The story goes that Abraham wrestled them overboard and threw them into the river below. Another layer of Abraham's mythos comes from the fact that he allegedly only ever lost 1 wrestling match in his entire life. In 1832, during the Black Hawk War in which Abraham served as a captain, a man named Lorenzo Thompson got the better of him in a match that was for the rights to a preferred campsite that the 2 men's respected units wanted. Besides this 1 loss, Abraham was said to have competed in over 300 wrestling matches, only ever losing that 1 time. Abraham was described as a catch-as, catch-can wrestler, who was made famous by his brutish strength and grappling skills. Another time, Abraham challenged to wrestle a local champion in New Salem. This champion began to foul Lincoln and make illegal moves. In response, Abraham picked him up, slammed him to the ground, and knocked him unconscious. Fact number 3. Abraham Lincoln was not exactly a huge eater. He was quoted as saying he preferred to eat food with little to no frills, preferring to eat mostly for function rather than for indulgence. While in office, he would oftentimes forget to eat or just straight up neglect to eat because he was preoccupied with work. He rarely ate breakfast, but if he did, it was usually a single egg with some toast and maybe a cup of coffee. He didn't care if his food was hot or cold, and usually ate all of his lunch meals in his office while continuing to work. It was said as well that if dinner was not placed in front of him on a literal silver platter, he would oftentimes forget to eat that too. A list of some of his favorite foods were nuts, fruit, his favorite fruit being apples, cheese, and crackers. His favorite dessert was apple pie, maybe for the PR? Anyway, with those cheekbones, I guess it's not too much of a surprise that Abraham wasn't exactly the biggest foodie in the world. Fact number 4. Perhaps the most distinguished piece of Abraham's wardrobe was his top hat. He wore it at his inauguration in 1860, during the entirety of the Civil War, when he was assassinated, at all of his children's births, and also in the bedroom. Those last 2 may or may not be exaggerated. Abraham is known around the world for his hat that makes you go, that's a little bit taller than what I imagine a top hat would look like, but not quite on the border of obnoxious yet. Abraham claimed it helped him brave unfriendly weather such as rain and snow, provided him with a safe place to store important documents, and gave him a significant height advantage over just about everybody he met. Above all else though, he really just did it for the aura. And I'm not joking either. Abraham was adamant about how he presented himself in public, wanting to stand out in any sea of people he found himself wading in, feeling it was essential to have a defining feature that anyone attending a speech of his could recognize. And so, the top hat was just the thing Abraham had in mind.
This guy understands brand recognition. 160 years later, and still the top hat is one of the most iconic pieces of American history. Of course, Abraham is what made it iconic. If a guy like him wore neon green suits would be cool. For it is the greatness in our actions that transform a questionable distinction into a symbolic icon. Fact number 5. There was a real possibility that Abraham Lincoln was not going to be elected president. As a matter of fact, for a significant portion of election season, an Abraham Lincoln victory was a slim chance at best. In 2025, we really only have 2 political parties that receive donations from billionaires. Sorry, I meant 2 parties that have an actual winning chance at the election, is what I meant to say. Right. In 1860, though, the year Lincoln was elected, there was an alternative mindset that most Americans shared. Most Americans did not associate with a political faction so much as they voted based on an individual candidate's policies. For at the time, most presidential candidates did not have much variety in their political opinions, and when they did, it wasn't on any major issues, such as slavery. Until this guy, of course, at which time American voters really did begin to align themselves more towards a party rather than an individual. For example, an American who was pro-slavery at this time would never vote for any member of the Republican Party at this time because they did not support slavery. And if you are anti-slavery, you never ever vote for a candidate that represents the Constitutional Union Party, for they were supporters of slavery. Quick side note that I feel is important to share. When talking about political parties in the 1800s, it is very important to keep in mind that they are not the same political parties we see today, although they do carry the same name. At this point in time, the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln's party, was considered the party of progression, while the Democrats and Southern Democrats, 2 separate parties by the way, were viewed as the more staunch conservative party. Okay, bye. Back to the video. The 1860 election was a wild one, to say the least. Prior to the election, there was a bit of an internal affair within the Democratic Party. I wouldn't call it a civil war, but that is coming soon though. It was more of a disagreement from the 2 major candidates running for Democratic nominee. Neither of them backed down, and so the Democratic Party was split into 2. There was now the Democrats and the Southern Democrats, essentially cutting the Democratic vote in half, leaving the door wide open for Republican Abraham Lincoln to burst in and take his rightful place as president. The 1860 election was also the last time that 4 different presidential candidates all received more than 10 electoral votes. Fact number 6. Abraham Lincoln is perhaps most celebrated for his part in abolishing slavery in 1862. However, it may come as a surprise to hear that he did not run his campaign on the idea of abolishing slavery, but instead he ran on the idea of limiting the expansion of slavery. Abraham had promised the southern states that he would not abolish slavery in their respective states. He would let them continue their ways, but would not allow any current non-slave states or any new states to become slave states. But, you see, this would tip the scales in Congress, and at this time, Congress was very into the idea of keeping things even, the same amount of slave states as non-slave states, so that when it came to voting on issues, the Senate vote would always be void of bias. Juxtaposing that, though, the United States had a great desire to expand their territory, with a vision of one nation spanning from coast to coast. In other words, manifest destiny. Manifest destiny, mixed with the idea of never expanding slavery into new states, means that Congress would most certainly become tipped too far in favor of non-slave states. Abraham Lincoln had every intention of maintaining the balance in the Senate until he was backed into a corner and eventually made the last resort decision. Once Abraham had legal authority to do so, and also the support from border states such as Kentucky, he went forward with his plan. 3 years into the Civil War, on January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln declared that all persons held as slaves within any state or states wherein the constitutional authority of the United States shall not then be practically recognized, submitted to, and maintained shall then, thenceforward, and forever, be free. Still, it wasn't Abraham's initial decision to completely abolish slavery, only to put an end to the expansion of it. And fact number 7, wrapping things up here. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln is perhaps the most infamous in United States history, maybe even in the history of the world. Abraham Lincoln also happens to be the first president in United States history to be assassinated. However, it was not the first attempted assassination of a president in our nation's history. That would be Andrew Jackson that wears that crown. On a cold winter day in January of 1835, there was an attempt on Andrew Jackson's life. A painter named Richard Lawrence approached President Andrew Jackson wielding a Derringer single-shot pistol. Ironically, Jackson was at the Capitol building to attend a funeral. Richard Lawrence fired a shot at Jackson, but his gun misfired, at which point Lawrence whipped out his second pistol and fired another shot. Another misfire. After Lawrence's first misfire, the 68-year-old Jackson charged at his assailant and began beating him with his cane, while bystanders tackled the man to the ground. In the 100 years after Abraham was assassinated, 8 more presidents and presidential candidates would have their lives attempted on, some being successful. And to this day, though, Abraham is one of only 4 presidents to be successfully assassinated: himself, James A. Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy.